Hannah Gould, welcome to the Anxiety Reset podcast. I am so happy to have you here.
I'm so excited to be here.
I love that we've been chatting for, I don't know, less than 10 minutes and already decided we should be friends.
Yes, I feel like it doesn't happen all the time, but every so often you meet somebody, you're like, oh, you're my people.
Hmm.
Like, this energy just works. This is fine. This does not work for me. Like, this is fun. So that's so nice.
And I would say I had that feeling just knowing the topic that you've delved into with your beautiful book, How to Die in the 21st Century. And I will just preface this whole interview for our listeners
Mm.
by saying that this is so relevant to anxiety because anxiety, if we really want to work our way through it, we do have to look into the shadowy places. We've got to look for the monster under the bed and see what's actually there because so often we suffer far more in our imagination than what is actually there in front of us. Like, let's deal with the facts. And so I am just so excited to talk about death with you, Hannah.
Talk about death. I promise it's not as scary as you think it was. I genuinely think that if you can get over that initial discomfort, the initial fear of talking about death, then it's lots of things. It's fascinating. It can be scary, but it also is deeply, deeply funny.
Yeah.
And often uplifting in a way that you don't expect. So a famous phrase like, talking about sex won't make you pregnant. Talking about death won't kill you. This is
Yes.
fine. We can have this chat.
I think it speaks volumes too that your cover of your book is not like red and black. It's hot pink and like highlighter yellow, like a full, or is it a lime? It's
I It's
very bright.
unknown. It's an unknown color, but I really, when I was talking to the publishers and they have the final say on these things, but I said, I want this to be, first of all, I want this to be a book that if you're reading it on public transport or, wherever, people kind of go, oh my God, this is a book about death and it's noticeable and you
Mm.
can see it.
Yeah.
Um, but then I also wanted it to be a book that was uplifting and beautiful and yeah, wasn't drab and dark and dancing skeletons and weird graves and stuff on
Yes.
it.
Yes, I love it. Okay, I feel we've already set the tone. This is not a
Mm.
heavy, like scary conversation. This is just a
No.
let's look at the monster under the bed kind of with the light on when you're a little kid and you think there's something under there and you're like, ah. So let's
Let's
just look at it
befriend the monster.
and befriend the monster.
Yeah.
Well, what I often say too is like when we actually look at what's under there, we're like, oh, it's not actually a monster, it's a mouse, or it's something like, oh, and we just need to do this with it. So this is the beauty of exploring this. But Hannah, how on earth did you end up in this place in your life where you have written a book about death in a culture
I
that is
know.
so allergic to the topic? And something that you've become so heavily involved in so many ways. Can you take us back to like how where did the dots join up
Where
in
did
your
the death
story?
come from? Yeah. So yeah, it's really in some ways I feel like it is in retrospect that I realized that a lot of things in my life led up to this kind of career and this research focus. So I think I mean, it's possibly unusual for a lot of people, but like I had two quite good girlfriends die when I was in high school. So I went to funerals early in my life, and that's like something you put away and you think, okay, that's perhaps unusual. You get there and I had grandparents die quite early. But then, I ended up at university studying religion and anthropology and being interested in questions like, how do we all have all these different ideas we have about the world? Where do they come from? Why are they, also distinct, including big questions about like what happens when you die. So as fate would have it, my dad died when I was in the final honors year of my anthropology degree. Um, and at the time, I thought I was all very mature and grown up,
Mm.
an adult, right? And I always say like, oh, 23, it was the oldest I'd ever been, right? I could handle this. I was an eldest daughter. Like I stepped up. I was the one that like, organized the funeral and was stoic and all these kind of things. And the nature of death and dying in Australia is such that like until you actually go through a primary bereavement, like a bereavement of someone who's really close to you, then you kind of death is this other world. You don't learn things about how death happens. Like we're not getting death education, and perhaps we should in primary school or high school. So we don't know all of these kind of it's I felt like I'd stepped into a different world. Um, Not just a different world in terms of like intellectually, like this is a thing that I was interested in studying and it didn't make sense to me, and therefore classic academic response. I was like, great, do a PhD in it. Um, but also emotionally, I think I am, a decade later and writing this book now, I'm kind of only really understanding what that was for me to have my dad die that young. Um, there's a great funny line from Christina Yang on the TV show what's it called, Grey's Anatomy,
Mhm.
and she talks about the Dead Dad Club, and like there's a club that you never want to enter, but one day you do, and it's the Dead Dad Club, and you can't leave, and people outside the club don't really understand what that means, right? And so I think I now recognize fatherless daughters around when I meet them, right? Because it's almost like it's this new reality that you step into. Um, and my dad was my person. He was like my person in the family that understood me the most. And so you have to learn to live with absence in a way that you don't get taught, which all of that is to say, um, it is both personal and professional that led me here, right? I like intellectually academic. I knew I wanted to be a researcher, and I found this thing that I think is infinitely fascinating with regards to study and academics. But then also personally, I had this really formative experience quite young when I was just choosing my research career. And I realized that like this is something that I needed to do to help make sense of the world. Um, and so here we are.
Mm.
Um,
Yeah.
a decade later, 2 degrees later, writing books about death. We just had our first lecture in the subject death yesterday with 200 plus people enrolled. Somehow, this is where the journey has led me. And it's pretty wonderful. Yeah.
Yeah, amazing. I'm wondering, Hannah, do you think that part of what has driven you, like what I'm hearing in your story, is almost this is the education, the answers that a younger version of yourself needed once upon a time?
Yeah, I would really have loved it if I had a bit more knowledge going into that process. And not that I regret what we did or that there's choices that necessarily we wouldn't have made with regard to the funeral, with regards to what grief looks like, all of these things. But just like there's a kind of lack of almost, it's not just facts, but almost like embodied knowledge, like how to be around death, how to grieve, how to what should you say to a bestie who's lost their dad, right? Like what does a village look like that comes together to care for people? And I think the heartbreaking thing is because people don't have knowledge, they are so terrified, have such anxiety about doing the wrong thing that sometimes people end up doing nothing at all,
Mm.
right? And to which I say, like, don't worry, like the worst thing that can ever happen to them has already happened to them. You're not gonna make it any worse in anything that you can do. And I think showing up and being there is always the most important. So yeah, I feel like I wish I had been so much more comfortable with death. I don't think it would have made it any better because it was never going to be better. But it would have helped me get through the tough time,
Mm.
right? It was always going to be a bad time. My dad died, but the experience of going through that would have perhaps been improved. Yeah.
Yeah, armoring yourself with knowledge and a sense of not quite being so bewildered in the unknown of the whole thing.
Yeah, and it is that thing of the unknown, right? About anxiety. Like, so much of anxiety in my life, and I think also in everyone's lives regarding death and dying, stems from ignorance, right? stems from, really specific questions about things like, what does aging look like? How does that feel in the body, right? How does dying look like? What does that actually look like? And if you want to, you can go and learn those things in detail. And the more I learn about them, actually, the more comforted I am.
Mm.
Like bizarrely.
Mm.
Sounds kind of odd sometimes, where it's like even learning about really kind of confronting difficult things about like what happens to the body after you die, or different belief systems around, where you go. The more I learn about it, the more comforted I am, because it is the great mystery, but there's plenty of knowledge out there if you want to learn. Yeah.
And Hannah, I mean, we have a choice to look under the bed at the shadowy, scary thing, or
Mm.
oh no, I don't want to go there. Oh, I'm just going to ignore it.
Mm.
And that is a far worse place to be.
100%. So this is really interesting in death, in regards to death in particular, with its relationship to anxiety, because there's a specific theory that's emerged in psychology in recent years, which is called terror management theory. And that uses this work of this very famous scholar, Ernst Becker, who's wrote this big book about the denial of death, this idea that basically all of our societies are set up so that we don't ever have to think about death, right? Um, age Aging people, dying people, people die in hospice, they don't die in the home. We don't bring the bodies back into the home. We don't hold funerals in the home. There's some 20-year-olds who walk into my second year death studies class, and they've never seen someone who's dying, right? So we've removed death from society. And terror management theory uses this kind of idea of us being death denialists and says, actually, that is the cause of a lot of other forms of anxiety in our lives,
Yeah.
right? Is this constant kind of, we're all constantly quite concerned about our mortality, right? And fair enough, because we don't know what's going to happen. But it underwrites so many other forms of anxiety, whether that's generalized anxiety, whether that's hypochondria, health-related concerns, whether that's concerns about the welfare of our friends and family. Like this kind of fear of death is famously described as the worm at the core of our existence, right? It's like the thing, the pit in the stomach that actually projects out, and you see it in a lot of different spaces today. And you see it in really surprising spaces. Like, I think a lot of contemporary wellness, for example, is
Mm.
influenced by death anxiety, right? Like all
And
of these
longevity, the obsession with
longevity.
we've
Oh
got to
my
live
gosh,
forever.
you've got to live forever. And, the implants and the filters and the Botox, and you can't possibly look like you're aging
Mhm.
because that means you'll die. Like and it's so funny because we all walk around with this like false reality where we're like, no, we all know we're going to age and die. But there are so many efforts now. It's like, take these herbs and these supplements and do whatever. And wellness culture kind of concerns me when it doesn't include death awareness. Like I'd like to have a vision of wellness that actually says, I want you to live as well as possible for as long as possible, and then I also want you to die as well as possible,
Mm.
right? There's so much we could be doing to bring death into wellness culture, right? Make death weller, as it were.
Mm.
And we're not doing it because wellness culture as it's set up at the moment is all like Silicon Valley tech bros injecting the blood of their children or whatever it is, whatever. Like literally those kind of stories of like, I will never die. I'm going to defeat death. As if death is the worst thing that can happen to you. I think a lot of us know that death is not the worst thing that can happen to you. I think anyone who's gone through great tragedy, women, I feel like women know that death is not the best thing, the worst thing that can happen to you. I'm not sure it's trickled down to men yet.
Totally.
I really see, yeah, some kind of masculinist urge to deny death is quite concerning in many ways. Yeah.
Yes. And I mean, you could look at our obsession with anti-aging and preserving youth as some kind of, it's about, for women especially, having a sense of value and self-worth and being appealing to men. But I think
Mm.
wrapped up in that is this deeper layer that you're talking about, which is this total fear of death, and trying to
Yeah.
pretend it's not there.
Just absolutely. And so it's really funny. So Ernst Becker and all these other scholars, they talk about all these different defense mechanisms we might use, right? And like to stop us from having to confront mortality. Um, and one of them is religion, the classic one, right? Like, don't worry, you'll die, but you'll go to heaven. So
Mhm.
really, death is not a big deal. Or you'll be reincarnated, or whatever, whatever religion gives you. There's also other forms of defense mechanism. So you think about people who become martyrs, right, in the nation. It's like, don't worry, you sacrifice yourself for the country, and then we will remember you forever. So you will live on in the memory. I mean, this is not just people who die, but great heroes,
Mhm.
figures, right? We'll build statues to you. So although you'll die, you'll be immortal somehow in our memory. And then the one that really fascinates me, and I am very guilty of, is that there's some evidence now, emerging evidence, that death salience, so thinking about death a lot, is associated with shopping,
Oh,
which is that we're just like, if we just buy ourselves little treats on Instagram and little clothes and nice things, then we won't have to think about death. Which really, I see that a lot, right? Like we're all just like shopping against death. We're all just trying to make ourselves feel better so we don't have to think about doom. Which
is,
I think this
is
is
it
not
all?
a problem.
Is it
It's
almost
not,
like, is it
yeah.
almost like, well, I'm gonna like at some point I'm gonna die, so I might as well like have a nice life right now, like almost instant gratification too.
Instant gratification. Of course, the silly thing is that we know the problem with shopping is that it's like smells lovely, nice, beautiful for a day or two. And then it wears away, and you're like, oh, okay, well, next t-shirt, right? Next, but you can keep it alive, literally keep that kind of joy alive, by shopping more and more. I mean, so all of these are not like harmful or bad. Like believing that you're going to go to heaven or believing that you'll live on in the memory of others or buying yourself little treats. These are not like necessarily bad things. Um, but maybe sometimes they're less helpful than others,
Mm.
right? Like maybe sometimes there could be, as you say, a kind of deeper, meaningful relationship that we could be cultivating with death that means we don't have to constantly defend against it. Like we don't have to constantly optimize it, throw things against it. We could actually, look under the bed for the monster, bring the monster out and make friends with them,
Yeah.
right? And realize that, there's lots of things that you do in your life, and death is just another friend sitting at the table, right?
Um,
And
i-
so,
Is that
yeah.
essentially what you mean, Hannah, by the term death neutral that you speak about?
Yes. Well, it's quite funny when people ask me to write about a book about death, and this whole book, quite hilariously, came about through an Instagram DM. Uh, my publisher was like, "Hey, I'm terrified of death. Do you want to write a book about death?" This is the whole origin of this book. She's still afraid of death, but we're getting there for her. I keep sending her things. Um, but yes, one of the things is there's been this massive movement, a social movement in America and the UK and Australia in recent years towards death positivity, right? So, we might have body positivity as a movement, and you had sex positivity as a movement, right? Sex is taboo. No, we want to be positive about it. We're going to talk about it. We're going to educate people about it. And I think death positivity is an amazing movement and it's done a lot of work to educate people. But my problem with the term death positivity is that I really don't like death. Like I don't know if I'm allowed to swear, but like I think I write in the book, like I think death's a bit fucked. I don't, I don't think it's romantic, that
Yeah.
grief or whatever. Like it's
And
terrible. What are you telling me? I don't want to be positive about my dad dying.
and
Like I don't.
that feels like denial to me again, because we're denying the very real human experience of I don't want to die and we don't like death, and it is confronting.
And
Yeah.
it's that toxic positivity stuff that turns up in so much of what, if you have experiences of anxiety or ID that sometimes gets thrown at you, right? Where it's like, well, you're not supposed to be anxious about that. You have to, let's all, be positive. That's exhausting, right? And I just know that if someone told me that after my dad had died, or even today, that I had to like be death positive, I would just like want to punch them. I'm like, I can't do this. This can't be your response. So I try in the book instead to put forward this idea of death neutrality. And death neutrality again lends itself. There's a kind of movement in we had body positivity and we now have body neutrality, right? Like your body is a thing that exists and it needs to be cared for, but maybe we'll remove some of that judgment. We just remove it from the realm of moral statements, right? It's not good, it's not bad, it's a thing that exists in the world. Death is not inherently good or bad. I describe death in the book more like mass or gravity or
Mm.
um, entropy. It is a condition of our universe. Like we live in a world in which things live and die, and that's how it is. Um, and you can either choose to accept that and walk alongside it, or you can resist it. But you don't have to like be positive about the fact that this is
Mm.
a thing that happens, and you don't have to be negative about it. It just exists, and if you start there and accept that, then you get to build your own layers of meaning about what you'd like to do. How do you like to bring it into your life? Practices, beliefs, how you show up for other people, all those kind of things. So yeah, I'm not really death positive. I think it just exists, and there are better and worse ways perhaps to respond to that existence.
How do
Mm.
you feel then about, for example, places like Mexico City where they have the Day of the Dead and this
Mm.
celebration of death? I don't know how I feel about it because I've never liked the like skulls with flowers, that kind
Yeah,
of
I hate that.
imagery. So I'm just curious on that topic, like how does that sit with you?
I mean, I wonder if I were a person who grew up in that society and had that background, like how I would feel about that imagery.
Mm,
I
mm,
think a lot of it, so much, one of the things that like fascinates me about death is like everybody dies, but like we don't do it the same. Everyone, like human cultures around the world throughout time have all approached this differently and, have their own aesthetics, have their own imagery. So I think I am not personally drawn to that way of remembering the dead. I do find it like a little bit too positive and uplifting. I think one of the interesting things that you find in cultures around the world that have what might be called like ancestor veneration, like some system of offering food and flowers and incense and treats, whatever it is, to the ancestors, is that the dead don't become ancestors immediately, right? So there's some period of years or months in which the dead are grieved as people who died, and that grief is quite sad and profound. And it's kind of maybe only later that they transition to becoming ancestors.
mm,
And so maybe after some time has passed, then you're able to be a little bit more positive, a little bit more happy in the face of it. But a lot of systems of cultures that I've worked in and talked about that have ancestor veneration will almost give you a timeline, right? It's like, here's the intense grieving for the person who's died, and then slowly, 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 they become more ancestors and less the dead person. So, um, yeah, I must say that, like, particularly when I was writing this book, I was like, there will be no skulls on the front cover. I'm not having any Day of the Dead Mexican
yeah,
themed appropriated imagery, but
yeah.
that's my, yeah, it's
I
not the
wonder
whole.
if a part of this idea of death neutrality or being death neutral is also something that humans are terrible at. And I think just look at our world to see how bad we are at this, holding nuance of two
Oh,
realities.
oh my God,
For
yeah.
example, the reality that is heart-wrenchingly crushing to lose
Mm.
someone that we love. And we also know, there's those phrases we might lean into, like the grief is there because there was so much love there. In funerals, we often see this beautiful outpouring of love and gatherings of people who come together in a very vulnerable and beautiful way in its own right. And perhaps even sometimes in death, there is relief because maybe someone was sick for a very long time, and there's this sense of they're in a better place than where they were. So I'm kind of, I guess my question is it about holding both and therefore it kind of cancel the positive and the negative cancel each other out and we get neutral?
Sure. I mean, 1,000%. I think the term that I use when I talk to my students about death is I talk about death being superlative. Like superlative in the English language is like that thing that is the est. It's the biggest, it's the largest, it's the saddest, it's the happiest. Like death is everything everywhere all at once, right? And it contains all of those emotions. And I think what we often get wrong is when we confuse grief with sadness, right? Like we assume that because someone has died, you are experiencing grief, and grief must look like depression or melancholia or sadness, right? But I feel like, yes, there is sadness, but there's also, as you say, relief. Um, we have complicated people relationships with people when they're alive. That complicated relationship doesn't go away when they die, right? And so you don't just grieve the people you love. Sometimes you grieve people that you had a really hard time with, right? And you still have a hard time with them after they've died. And also maybe you're happy for certain aspects. There's a lot of humor after somebody dies, and I think people should feel okay with that. That's totally normal. Like I remember when my grandmother passed, she had previously they had bought my grandfather died previously and he had bought like a double grave. So it would be one person on the other, like on top of it. And like we only found this out like after she died, and the only thing we could think of is like my poor grandfather underneath the whole time, like tapping up on the top of his coffin, being like, please get off me. And it's just like it's silly, it's funny,
Yeah.
but it's just like we just kept, I think the best funerals and the best celebrations have room for all of it, right? And you can be celebrate the life, but you can also be deeply sad. Um, and there's a lot of different emotions. And that is like the key thing, right? Is to be able to, as you say, hold space for all of those, like allow them to coexist, allow that contradiction to exist. And humans are generally not very good for that, as you point out. Like
Mm.
we do like things to be either one or the other.
Yes.
Um, yeah. There's a so I teach in Buddhist studies and I have studied Buddhism for a long time, and there's a kind of logic that Buddhists use that's like nothing is ever either or, it's both and,
Mm.
right? So instead of either or thinking, we need to shift towards more both and thinking. Yeah, and that's kind of like there's no such thing really as opposites or things that are diametrically opposed. There's just this both and of multiple things happening at once,
Mm.
um, which is hard.
Yes. Yeah,
It's hard
totally.
to do.
And I honestly think that is one of the things that, again, I've sort of mentioned briefly the world at the moment, and
Yeah.
pretty much how it's been since about
I was
2020.
going to say funny because this could be any point since 2020 that you're
Yeah,
recording this.
yeah. But it's like
The world,
that,
yeah.
that's it's such an easy thing to look at the news headlines and go, oh God, bad. But I think there are multiple truths at play as well.
Yeah, or look at the news headlines and be like, well, which side am I supposed to be on, right? Which is
Mhm.
the hot take that I'm supposed to adopt?
Mm.
And it's like rarely one or the other. Um,
I'm
but
just pro love, Hannah, and peace.
yeah, can we? It's funny as a death studies scholar, it's like I'd actually prefer that no one dies. I don't know.
Mm.
I'd like to advocate for less death. And I mean, that is one of the things to say as well. Like, we are incredibly lucky in Australia that, in the space of basically 2 generations, how we now die is totally transformed. My grandparents on both sides had 10 siblings, right? So I had 10 grandmothers, but only a very few of them made it all the way through their childhood through to adulthood, right?
Mm.
Infant mortality, childhood mortality was such a major concern, um, even for my grandmother's generation, right? And in the space of, to me, that is unheard of. Like it's so tragic and so bad because when it happens, it's become such an anomaly in terms of numbers. That's not to diminish it obviously as a tragedy, but it's so much rarer for kids to die now or infants to die.
Yes.
Most of us can expect to live to our 80s, right? And that's pretty extraordinary. I don't think we acknowledge that enough. Like, we have a pretty amazing system of healthcare and welfare in Australia, such that, like, death is now a thing that we do in old age,
Mm.
which feels normal and obvious, but it hasn't been for a really long time.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you also mentioned, while we're talking about the state of the world, that
Mm.
we're approaching something, I believe you call it a peak death era.
Peak death. Yes. Well, I sometimes feel a bit uncomfortable talking about this because I sometimes have to talk to it about peak death to baby boomers. And baby boomers sometimes get quite offended when I point out that baby boomers will one day die. Um, not sure they believe me.
It's not
Um,
exactly, and like bless and love all our baby boomers that might be listening, but also I would say it's not a generation where taboo topics, emotions, death was readily explored as well. So I think it's easy to,
Yeah, it's weird to me though, the walking contradiction of the baby boomers. And look, I always talk about my mum, who is so squarely a baby boomer. Um, she was also like in the 60s and 70s hippie movement, free love, and
yeah.
and so my mum, so the basically what's happening is that we live in an aging society in Australia, and the youngest baby boomer, if however you define this, has just entered the category that the Australian government calls older Australians. They're 65 and a plus. The youngest baby boomer is now 65 and above, which obviously at 65 got a lot of living left to do.
Mm,
But what this means for death in Australia is that we're going to enter a period in about 2030, 2040, in which more people are dying than we've ever had dying before.
mm,
Um, and baby boomers are kind of quite different as a generation to other generations that have come before them and, perhaps come after. Like, they're less religious than we've ever seen. Um, they perhaps have more financial resources, although it's very unequally distributed across the generation. Um, and they really care about things we think like crafting an end of life funeral celebration that's meaningful to them. Um, and so they're doing things like pre-planning their funeral, prepaying for a funeral even. Um, and purchasing a grave and all these kind of new things that are happening in death. Um, and I think the other thing that's important to remember there with this kind of coming age of peak death in Australia, and it's just like a fundamental truth of death and dying, is that the dead don't bury themselves, right? And in the same way, death is always about who's doing the caring and the caring labor. And what we're going to see probably with this kind of emerging peak death era and older people now dying in higher numbers is like a lot of care labor that's being done by their kids. And by their children, I mostly mean eldest daughters. Um, because we know from the research that eldest daughters or only daughters play an extraordinarily important role in caring for their aging parents, often at the same time as they're also caring for kids. This is this thing called the sandwich generation, right? People who have both kids and elderly parents that they're trying to navigate. Um, and and so there's a lot of kind of changes that we might see happening in death and dying in Australia with regards to like who is doing the dying, but also to who is doing the caring, and how do we support those people doing the caring. Um, so it's yeah, it's a weird thing to say like it's an interesting time to be in death.
mhm.
But it is an interesting time to be thinking about death. I'm really, really hopeful that baby boomers are going to kind of cause a revolution in death. And we're gonna, like, because it's the largest generation and they're moving towards the end of life, they're gonna demand more knowledge and education and openness in our conversation about dying. Right? We can finally have these conversations that we've needed to have.
Mm.
Yeah.
I find this really grounding in a weird way because, without maybe I've just spent too much time online looking at conspiracy theories wading my way through that keep popping up, and then some that you're like,
Sure.
oh, that's not a conspiracy theory. That's starting to be verified.
Been a
Um,
weird, it's been a weird couple of years for things we thought were conspiracy theories turning out to be true, hey?
yes. And
Yeah.
one such theory is say that there's an agenda of depopulation of the world where we want to cut
Mm.
down the population of the world. But what I find grounding is that regardless, we are going to have a lot of people die.
We're
In
going to have a
an
lot of people die.
and we
Yeah.
and it's sort of there's a from that place because I don't like being in the is it true? Is it not true? What's happening? Like what? So I don't think any of us like that. So, in this place of statistically, we can just see that that's going to occur. It forces us into a place of acceptance, and it's sort of like, how are we going to address this issue? And yeah, I do believe that, in the coming decade, we are going to be confronted with death
A
in
lot more deaths. Yeah.
Mhm.
It's happening at different places around the world in different times. So you somewhere like South Korea or Japan have really aging populations.
Mm,
So their peak death is now, right? And you see a lot of elderly people dying. And then they also have very low migration rates. So what that means is the population's getting smaller, right? In comparison, somewhere like Sweden, for example, aging population, also heading towards peak death, but they have a lot more migration. So the population's actually getting younger. And then you have somewhere like Nigeria, for example, that won't hit peak death until like 2050, 2060, because their population is so young, right?
mm,
So it just depends kind of, it's all got to do with all of these like, World War II finished 70 years ago, or however long that was. And, people's decision to have kids then en masse has now created this kind of ripple-on effect, which is that we have this really large baby boomer population. We just have a lot of older Australians,
mm.
right? We have a lot more older Australians now.
And more
And
of
somebody
our
has to care for them. Yeah.
yes, and more of our generation choosing to have less children as well, and sometimes
Yeah.
zero children.
People choosing to have less kids or have animals as opposed to humans. A lot of fur babies in my generation. Or also, growing acceptance of queer families and queer family structures and LGBTQA plus relations, such that, family looks very different now
Mm,
in Australia than what it looked like my mum's generation, my grandparents' generation. And that's really affecting death in weird ways. Like who we choose to grieve is really, in many ways, a reflection of who we see as family.
mm,
And if you think about right now, like close your eyes and think about who you think about family.
mm,
Um, if you're a woman and you're a young person and if you're a queer person, you're more likely to think about friends,
mm.
pets, non-blood relations as your family, not just as friends, as family.
Yeah.
And that is going to transform death, right? Because we show up for family in hard times. Um, Now, sometimes it transforms death in a really weird way. As I write in the book, someone spent $3,000 to cremate a goldfish in Sydney because apparently the goldfish was part of the family. It's not a choice I would make, but I
Humans.
try I try to like not yuck someone's yum. You know what I mean? Like I try to be non-judgmental about what people choose to love. But that, I'm a dog person myself, so dogs are definitely family. I don't know if I have the emotional capacity to extend that to goldfish, but good
Yeah.
on you
Yeah.
if you do.
Totally. I'm wondering, do you think there are places in the world where we do death better? For example, I am aware that in Japan, we're certainly better, they're better to the elderly population. There's a lot more
Mm.
respect, there's a lot more reverence for an elderly person, whereas in our society, and I feel the yearning for elders and wisdom in our society. Like there are these very rare social media or YouTube older people who, if they are the rare ones that get on and start speaking, people are like, oh my God, we're
I
hungry for
love
it.
them.
Yeah,
older women who look fabulous, who dress fabulously. Like this is my goal in life. It's
yeah,
just to be my friend and I, this is very Melbourne, my friend and I call them NGV women. The women that go to
yes.
the women that go to NGV and they're all wearing this like oversized jewelry and these weird cut clothing and they're
That's
like,
that's the art gallery for those
yeah, bloody love
who
an
aren't
art gallery.
familiar.
Yeah, National Gallery of Victoria. That these are the women that I admire the most.
Mm,
Yeah, I mean, I think everyone has, there's no perfect utopia of death. Um, I was trying to convince the city of Melbourne to like do a campaign to be like the most deathable city in the world. And
how did that go?
yeah, well, it turns out you don't want to tell people to come to your city to die, apparently. But so no, there's no death utopia. Like I don't think there's really one place that gets everything right.
Yeah.
Um, but there are, if I was building such a utopia, there are elements that I would borrow from lots of different systems around the world, in terms of like Irish funeral wakes, right? Where you bring the body home and you all get together and you sing and you drink and you dance and you keen over the body, which still happens today in Ireland, but also in Irish Australians. And um, yeah, respect for the elderly and kind of ancestor veneration from East Asian traditions like Korea and Japan. Um, and then, ways of designing cemeteries or burying the dead or looking after grieving people that exist in all of these different countries around the world. I mean, like Scotland has a public payment that you get to help you organize a funeral, and the handling of the body. And I think that's great. Like I think we should have death care as part of Medicare. Like it should
Mm,
be really give me cradle to grave
mm,
healthcare system. Like I would like our healthcare system to connect more to our death care system. So there are lots of different things I suppose I would pick from different cultures around the world, and it's just a matter of doing that. And we can do that. Like you can do that in the death that you experience for your friends and family and the funeral that you create
mm,
and how you choose to approach death. Like you can learn from the best, and bring that into your practice. Um, and I just think that'd be wonderful if we had that.
mm.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there's obviously a lot of changes that need to happen at a social level and a governmental system level, as
Hmm.
always, of course.
As always.
It's just like
I'm
a
working on it. Add it to the list, but I am working on it. I'm
yeah.
trying. We've got a few things that are happening that are changing. We recently pushed to have co-burial of animals and humans in cemeteries, which was a big, I know it's like a small change, but a lot of our cemeteries in New South Wales and Victoria, um, up until this point, only allowed human remains, um, with I think quite rare exceptions for things like guide dogs and those kind of companion animals. But there's been a move now to say, hey, no, like, why would you not, if you want to scatter the ashes of your dog in a human cemetery,
Mm.
that reflects contemporary family, what a family looks like.
Also flash like gives me flashes of like ancient Egypt vibes too.
Yes, cats. Kind
Well,
of.
just didn't they weren't they buried with their pets and that like all the special
Yeah, I
objects?
am not advocating to take them with you. I think you wait until they die of natural
Yeah,
causes,
I
and then
yes.
this is one of the things people ask me. They're like, "So do we?" I was like, "No, what are you talking? No, this is not ancient Egypt. We're
Sorry.
not throwing in the animals as sacrifice onto the funeral
Sorry,
pyre. We are
time's up, Fido. I'm like,
we're respectfully waiting."
yeah, yeah.
But often people we do this research project about people who have sets of ashes in their home. And people often have like many, many, many sets of ashes of dogs and family pets in their home that they want to do something with or they want to be buried with. Um, and you're not supposed to mix them. Like they're not supposed to go into a cemetery. But so I did some very interesting and odd things for this book. But when I was working at a crematorium for this book and cremating people, we would often have people put ashes of dogs and cats into the coffin so that they could be mixed together, right? Like if someone's beloved dog had passed previously, often the family would add that to the coffin so it can be all together, which I think is, I mean, I think that's lovely. I don't,
Mm.
But again, each to their own. Some people really don't like that, right? Some people think that humans are the only ones with souls. We have to have, a separation in the cemetery. That is, if that is your belief, that is also fine. Like you don't have to do this. It's not enforced. But there's so many different ways that you can choose to make that family known in death as well as in life. And I think that's great. So there are some changes, like there are some good moves that just came in last year.
Mm.
There are some
Yeah.
things looking.
Thanks to
Yeah.
brave people like you actually delving in and looking into these shadowy places. And I feel
Mm.
like, it may sound cliche, but we bring the light to it when we look, you know. Um, I want to speak to something that I've been sort of in the background pondering as we've been talking, because you
Mm.
said earlier on that we can uh we sort of have this awareness ever present that we will die at some point.
Mm.
And on some in some ways I see that, because I mean I remember being like 7 or 8 years old, not being able to sleep at night because I was becoming aware of mortality, and
Mm.
just kind of trying to process it. And sometimes I just like, have to get my
It's
mum
a
in the middle of
lot.
the night. Yeah. Like I can still remember actually coming to terms with that. Don't know if you
Mm.
ever come to terms with it, because it's not a resolved issue. But then at the same time, I think I live most of the time in a bit of a bubble of delusion. It's definitely there deeper down unconscious that death is
Totally,
a
but that's
thing.
like totally fine. Like if we all went around every day being like, I'm gonna die, you can't get anything done. Like you
Yeah,
can't-
but
I would never get any. I mean, I am somebody who thinks about it a lot more than others.
and I
Like,
wonder if that's
yeah.
partly if we've had earlier experiences of death, especially when it's
Mm.
death before the time that we see as natural and right. So I've had all
Yeah.
my grandparents pass away, for example, but they were all over 80, some
Oh,
over
goodness.
90. It's easier to be at peace with that. I
Mm.
haven't lost my close immediate family members. So yeah,
Mm.
I'm just and yet you had some earlier, you said friends that passed way too
Yeah.
young. Your dad passed too young, as we would say, too young.
Yeah, I mean, it is a really interesting thing, this idea of like, so what we're talking about here is this idea of a good death. Like, what does a good death look like for us? And for most people, if you ask in Australia, a good death is like die at 90 on your sick bed, surrounded by friends and family. You've just finished your great life's work, whatever. And then, there's no pain. It's quick, it's painless, it's, overnight, that sort of thing. Um, and this is in some ways, a very powerful image, but also kind of a very silly image because this is rarely what actually happens. This is so few people get to die a good death,
Mm.
right? And it also, if we have this ideal of a good death, it creates this kind of sense that, like, well, maybe other deaths are bad
Mm.
or they are untimely, so people go too young. They die suddenly without warning, so you have these horrific. So I know, just here in the news today, someone died in a ski field, like a young person died in a ski field in Japan, or shark attack or car accident, whatever it is, these kind of like sudden deaths. And then obviously we also have like stereotypically bad deaths, which are to things to do with, people taking their own lives or children dying. Children dying is the ultimate taboo, the ultimate bad death, because this shouldn't happen in our society. And I think if you have experiences with bad death, if you have experiences with deaths that have been difficult or untimely or sudden, then you do it does almost feel like, I suppose what I was trying to explain at the very start is it does almost feel like you live in a different world to a
Mm.
lot of people.
Mm.
Like it almost feels like you're carrying around this raven on your shoulder or something. And that's why you also recognize other people who have gone through it. You're like, ah, you too, right. You know, I know what it's feel like to lose a parent in my 20s. We have a connection. Um, and it's really so cliche to say that it's a blessing and a curse. but it really is a blessing and a curse. Like I would trade off the blessing every single day. Like bring my dad back. Like I don't I refuse to actually like make this trade. If you have it, if you experience it, you go through it, then you at least for me, and having gone through it for a decade and seeking professional help and talking to people and learning more about death, I feel like I have a much more healthy relationship with mortality than a lot of my friends who their parents' death terrifies them. Like the idea of their parents getting old and aging and dying is really scary for them. Whereas my poor mum, like we talk about dying all the time. She's like, yeah, I'm gonna die. And like and I think though, like I write a lot about my mum in this book, actually. In some ways, it's actually a book for her. Like my mum was married to my dad for 40 years and had this amazing relationship, and he died. The classic thing where he just retired from work and was going to spend this, yeah, 20 years traveling the world with her. And he has this kind of very sudden, terrible illness and dies. And she, I mean, it broke us, it broke all of us for ages, but she like took up running at 68 or something. She ran a 10K for her 70th birthday. Like, she's got a social life that's way more exciting than mine. She's got, I can never see the woman because she's at yoga or dance or choral or like, so and she also, I think at the end of the day, there is something to be said about the joy of living in the light of your mortality,
Mm,
right? Living with the knowledge of your mortality, because I just I just don't care about the small stuff as much
yeah.
because we're gonna die. Like I'm gonna die. It's fine, and at the same time, we're gonna die. So I should go overseas. I should take that leap. I should do that career change. And I see that in her, and like I try and live that in me, which is that the funny thing, I suppose, is that you expect deaf people to be sad, but deaf people are joyous because they know, like they know that it's all going to end. And so they're deeply funny and have weird hobbies and, really embrace the day. And whenever I get to spend time with people who work in the sector or who study death, they're the best times. You
Yeah.
never know what's going to happen, but you're like, okay, we're all going to die.
Yeah.
Let's go to Iceland. Let's let's have a round of drinks. Let's whatever it is. And yeah, bloody hell, I really didn't want that blessing and the curse, but now that I've got it, I feel like it has taught me to live better
Mm,
because of my dad dying.
yeah.
Which-
You've lived and survived through one of your worst nightmares that most of us, if we haven't gone through it, it's the, I don't know if I will survive. And you know
Yeah,
that you have.
the worst thing can ever happen to me has already happened to me. Like,
Yeah.
cool.
Yeah.
What, you're gonna throw something else at me, life? Fine. Like I've got it. Um, and yeah, I really see that in my mum in particular as well. Like that is you know, I think the phrase strong woman is overused, but my God, that is a strong woman.
Mm,
Like who
mm.
just got through, right? In an unexpected way.
And perhaps there's this loosening of our grip on our ego and our sense of like everything matters and I'm a failure or I'm a success or I need things
Mm.
to be a certain controlled way. It's like there's this sense of, well, does it matter in the best, most liberating way? Not in the, oh, so what's the point of anything? It's the,
Yeah,
yeah,
I think it can be quite nihilistic. And I think you want to be careful if you're like turning towards nihilism, nothing matters, everything's terrible. What is the point of life? Life is meaningless. Not
yes,
a good route to go down.
yes,
But in the uplifting version of that, of existentialism, of this idea of like, oh, no, nothing matters. So I get to choose what matters,
yeah,
right? We're all going to die. So I get to choose how to live.
Mm.
That is where I find the most value of living in the light of your mortality, right? Of like choosing to be mortal,
Mm.
um, and think about mortality because yeah, there's you just think, well, I don't care if I'm embarrassed or fail or, something goes wrong.
Yeah.
You'll be fine.
This
You'll be
might
fine.
just be the most uplifting, death neutral chat about death ever. Hannah, I'm
Oh,
mindful of the time and I feel like
yes.
we could just like chat and chat and chat. Do you have time for one
Okay.
more question?
Yeah, let's do one more question. If I do get interrupted, I'll let you know. We can pause, but I think I have time for one more question.
My question is, when we die, given you've
Mm.
gone so deep into this topic, after death, what do you think happens?
Okay. I'm fear I may disappoint you, but I actually think my answer is really beautiful. So there are many people who believe lots of things about where we go after I die, and I think all of them are beautiful and meaningful. I am of the school of food for worms. I
Mhm.
really think it's the end. I really think that I will die and my body will decompose and I will become one with the earth. And a little bug, a lovely little bug, will eat some part of me. And then it's a little beetle will eat the bug, and a bird will eat the beetle, and a cat will eat the bird. And I will return to from whence I came, to the cycle of nature, of life. And I think some people see that as depressing, that like death is an end, but I see that as extraordinarily uplifting again. Like I feel so much closer to mortality, but also to nature because I have that belief. Like I can walk through a forest of trees and know that I'll be there one day.
Mm.
And, I see rain and I know probably statistically some atom of my dad is in that rain. And that's kind of lovely because I think we're never that far away if we just return to the earth. So who knows? Maybe I'll be wrong. You can't write a sequel to a book about death from the other side, unfortunately.
Unless you have a near-death experience, which those are
Unless you have a
fascinating,
near-death
but
experience, in which
look,
case maybe you can write the book.
look, look, I mean it's a very that is beautiful and it's very actually aligned in a quite a spiritual way with the oneness of the
Yeah,
world
it's
returning
Om.
to the ultimate connection. We're all
Yes.
connected. It's all connected.
Yeah, and it's kind of, I suppose it's informed by science, but as you say, it's also informed by Dharmic religious traditions and Hinduism and Buddhism and yoga as a yoga practitioner,
Mm.
that in the end, in death, you become one with the universe again. And
Of course
there's
you
a
do.
beautiful, yeah, and
Of course you do
there's this,
yoga.
of course I do yoga. But
Shavasana, corpse pose, end of every class.
I'm taking my yoga teacher training this year and I'm going to lean into the corpse pose meditation for everyone at the end. I feel like I need to bring back the corpse pose. The corpse pose is underappreciated. It should be a moment of death contemplation after you finish your yoga. There's this really beautiful metaphor just to end on that we use in Buddhist studies to explain this, and it's a very famous metaphor, which is that you see individual lives as just the waves that are cresting in the ocean, and once those waves fall upon the shore, they return to the ocean because they were always part of the ocean. And for me, that's all it is. We're just waves heading towards the shore. It's pretty nice.
That is pretty nice. Who knew we
No,
could
it's worth that.
ride this topic home into such a beautiful place? Hannah, thank you so much. It has been just the most delight to speak with you. Where can we find your book? Where can we
Oh my
learn more
gosh.
about you?
Please, please, please read the book. So the book is How to Die in the 21st Century. It was published yesterday, so it was out the start of March. Published with Thames and Hudson. You can find it everywhere online. go to an independent bookstore, hire it in, order it in. You can go to any big box. I think it's at Big W. I think it's in Readings. Wherever books are sold, please, I'd love you to read it. And I think it's actually, I would also say, a great book club book if
Mm,
you want to get your book club thinking about death,
mm, I agree.
one to have a chat about it
Yeah.
with friends.
Yeah. Beautiful.
Yeah.
We'll have that information in the show notes and links to where you guys can find it.
There's also an audiobook that I recorded if any of you want to go to Audible.
And just go like listen to
Li-
death on your walk.
Listen to my dulcet tones as I describe decomposition to you.
I love it. Oh, Hannah, you are such a delight.
Oh,
I'm gonna have to
woo.
find you in a cozy cafe in Brunswick sometime. I'll
Yeah,
reach
I was
out.
gonna say we should connect. This is
Yeah,
so wonderful.
so fun. Thank you so much.